What happens when a tech company fires the only person who knows how their $80 million system actually works? Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well for them. I'm Maya Chun, and this is the story of how I watched my former employer's digital empire crumble in real time while I sip coffee from my new corner office. Stick around because the revenge was served ice cold, and the lessons learned will save your career. The moment I knew Nexus Dynamics was going to betray me wasn't when they reassigned my junior developer Emma Rodriguez to team culture initiatives, or when CTO Brandon Mitchell started responding to my architecture reports with thumbs-up emojis and zero actual feedback. It was when I walked into the server room that Tuesday morning in downtown Austin and found a half-eaten breakfast taco perched on the RAID array I personally designed. Bacon and egg, no wrapper. Just grease stains on $800 million worth of infrastructure and someone's coffee cup ring permanently etched into the cooling unit. That's how you know your digital masterpiece is about to become an orphan, when people start treating it like a break room table. ChronoSecure wasn't just another blockchain platform. It was my cathedral, my magnum opus. A distributed ledger that authenticated and time-stamped every microtransaction, government contract, and corporate handshake from Silicon Valley to Singapore. We had Pentagon officials making inquiries, Fortune 500 CEOs circling like sharks, even the Federal Reserve quietly exploring integration possibilities. And every single bit of it ran on my core authentication module, Quantum Lock. Not stored in our main repository, not backed up on company servers, not even documented in our technical specifications. Why? Because I learned early in my career never to trust companies that schedule mandatory culture alignment sessions right before budget review season. The system was live across 12 countries, processing petabytes of critical financial data and generating $3.2 million in licensing fees monthly. But here's what nobody at Nexus Dynamics realized. They were running a sophisticated digital fortress built on a foundation that only I could access. When HR Director Patricia Wells summoned me to Conference Room C with her practiced corporate smile and firm handshake, I already had a copy of my termination letter. It had been accidentally CC'd to me by a junior operations manager who apparently thought BCC stood for barely concealed communication. Maya's position has been deemed redundant in our post-deployment operational framework. Redundant. After 4 years, 3 product launches, 2 industry awards, and 1 DDoS attack I neutralized from a hospital bed while recovering from pneumonia and hooked up to 4 fluids, I was suddenly redundant. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I smiled. Not broadly, just enough to make them wonder what cards I was still holding. Because here's what nobody in that glass-walled conference room understood. The system they just deployed globally was essentially a beautiful, impenetrable vault with no actual floor. The keys to Quantum Lock were mine, stored in a custom offline module I'd named Athena after the Greek goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. Because if you're going to architect someone's downfall, you might as well do it with mythological flair. What they didn't know was that I discovered their plan 3 months earlier. During a late-night debugging session, I'd accidentally accessed Brandon's shared drive and found a folder labeled Post-Maya Transition. Inside were architectural diagrams of Quantum Lock, reverse engineering attempts, and email chains discussing how to minimize dependency on single-point expertise. They've been planning to replace me since the successful deployment, thinking they could simply hire fresh graduates to maintain what I'd built. That's when I implemented my insurance policy, a secondary authentication layer so deeply embedded in the system architecture that removing it would require rebuilding from scratch. Every critical function now required a cryptographic handshake with Athena, and Athena only responded to my biometric signature. I also wasn't working alone anymore. Over the past year, I'd built relationships with key players throughout the industry. Dr. Sarah Kim at MIT's cryptography lab, who'd peer-reviewed my original Quantum Lock research. Marcus Thompson, the investigative tech journalist who'd broken the story on 3 major corporate scandals. And most importantly, Alexandra Volkov, the enigmatic venture capitalist who'd been quietly acquiring patents and talent in the blockchain space. These weren't just professional contacts. They were my early warning system and my backup plan. I didn't rush my response. Let them celebrate their streamlined operations and post their self-congratulatory press releases about optimizing human resources for sustainable growth. I'd already seen their next move coming from miles away. They were frantically trying to onboard a replacement team to reverse engineer my authentication systems. Amateur mistake, because I'd embedded a little surprise in the diagnostic protocols, a line of code so buried you need to speak fluent insomnia and chronic caffeine addiction to find it. Someone did find it, because at 2:47 a.m. on a Wednesday night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message preview made me smile. Is this some kind of sick joke? That's when I knew they'd try to activate Quantum Lock's emergency protocols. And that's when I knew they were already completely locked out. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. Not with words, just silence and the sound of me methodically opening a can of soda. Let them marinate in their own panic. Ms. Chen, the voice said, tight and struggling to maintain composure. Male, early 30s, probably the same hotshot Stanford graduate they thought could reverse engineer a system I'd built during 2 years of 90-hour weeks and stress-induced insomnia. We're experiencing some unexpected behavior in the Quantum Lock authentication environment. I almost laughed. Instead, I took a deliberate pause and asked, did someone attempt to manually override the initialization sequence? The silence that followed told me everything. They tried to bypass the biometric handshake. Novices. It triggered a cascading failure protocol that locked down every critical function. We can't authenticate any transactions past T0, he continued. T0, the exact moment Quantum Lock had initialized, the moment I'd walked out of Nexus Dynamics forever. Sounds like an authentication architecture issue, I replied calmly. Another pause, deeper this time, like he was staring into an abyss and realizing he was about to fall in. The company would appreciate your cooperation in resolving this matter, he finally managed. Let me guess, I interrupted. You're offering me a consulting contract, a public statement about mutual respect, and maybe a Starbucks gift card? Dead silence. So I made it worse. You didn't just lock yourselves out of an authentication protocol, I said. You've invalidated the chain of custody for $80 million in active smart contracts. Every transaction since my credentials went dark is legally worthless. Can't be verified, can't be audited, can't be backfilled. Still no response. No typing sounds, no breathing, just the kind of silence that precedes corporate catastrophe. And here's the beautiful part, I continued. Because of how I structured the auditing architecture, this isn't just broken going forward. The corruption propagates backward. You now have 12 governments and 47 private clients unknowingly operating on compromised ledgers. I'll let him hang up first. That's the thing about real power. When you actually possess it, you don't need to make threats. You just wait for the silence to become deafening. And it did. 6 hours later, I woke to 73 missed calls, 5 block numbers, and an email from CEO David Harrison's personal account with the subject line, urgent, immediate consultation required. But it was the courier package that made me sit up and pay attention. Hand-delivered to my downtown Austin apartment, no return address. Inside, my original employment contract, a printed Slack conversation thread with my name redacted from every message, and a non-disclosure agreement backdated to 3 days before my termination. They were trying to make it appear that I'd never actually worked there, that I was some freelance contractor with delusions of grandeur and no legitimate claim to the system architecture. They thought they were erasing me from their corporate history. What they hadn't realized, I'd been documenting everything for months, storing encrypted backups on a private server in Iceland, and one of their biggest clients had already reached out to me directly. You never forget the first time a billionaire texts you at 4:23 a.m. with nothing but a smiley emoji and the words, "We should talk." It wasn't even sent through an assistant. Alexandra Volkov, the phantom behind half the fintech infrastructure acquisitions in North America, had messaged me directly. A woman so wealthy, she once purchased an entire data center just to host her family's private communication network. She didn't ask about the corporate drama, didn't mention ChronoSecure, or the digital crater that Nexus Dynamics was creating in real time. Her message was simple. You built Quantum Lock, correct? I want something better. Something truly sovereign. That word resonated with me. Sovereign. Not just secure, not just efficient. Sovereign, as in beholden to no masters, no shareholders, no executives who'd bury the architect the moment the ribbon was cut on their grand opening. I told her I'd consider it. Then I spent 3 hours staring at the Austin skyline, drinking coffee, and planning my next move. Back at Nexus Dynamics, the crisis was reaching critical mass. Someone had finally noticed the authentication discrepancies and triggered a full compliance audit. That meant lawyers. International lawyers. That meant digital signatures being rejected mid-transfer by financial institutions in Dubai, Singapore, London, dominoes falling in perfect sequence, all tracing back to a single line of code I'd buried 8 months earlier in a function I'd mischievously named getTemperature. Yes, I'm exactly that petty. By dawn, CTO Brandon Mitchell, the same executive who once told me, "Don't overcomplicate it, Maya, it's just digital handshakes," was publicly blaming me for corporate sabotage. Except here's the beautiful irony. There was no evidence of sabotage because I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd simply designed the system to require my presence. They deleted the architect, and now they were trapped inside a cathedral with no doors and no blueprints. Let them pray to whatever corporate gods they worshipped. I received confirmation from my Icelandic backup service that all documentation was secure. Emails, chat logs, version histories, proof of authorship certificates, and a fail-safe protocols, all tied to my biometric authentication and digitally notarized. Just as I started drafting my public response, a second courier arrived. No return address, just a single flash drive with a sticky note. Play alone. I ran it in an isolated sandbox environment. The file contained screen recordings of my private Slack conversations, messages I'd sent to Emma about my mental health, about working 100-hour weeks, about the anxiety attacks during crunch periods, about my growing distrust of Brandon, about my fear that they'd terminate me immediately after the successful deployment. At the end was a video clip, grainy security footage, obviously edited, showing me entering the server room days before launch. The timestamp had been altered to make it appear I'd accessed systems without authorization. It was doctored terribly, but compelling enough to suggest corporate sabotage. They were building a narrative. The unstable engineer, the disgruntled ex-employee with excessive system access and insufficient mental health support. That was their final mistake. Because if you're going to eliminate the architect, you'd better make sure she didn't design multiple escape routes. The last time I'd felt genuine fear was during a fire drill at Nexus Dynamics, when someone had accidentally locked the server room doors from the outside. I was trapped inside with no phone signal, no air conditioning, surrounded by humming servers that sounded like a mechanical symphony of impending doom. But this wasn't fear. This was warfare. They were constructing a narrative. The mentally unstable engineer, the bitter ex-employee with dangerous system access and inadequate psychological support, a woman who'd gone rogue after being gently transitioned out of her position. Charming, except I'd already sent time-stamped copies of my access logs to 3 journalists, Rebecca Martinez at Wired, James Chun at TechCrunch, and Maria Santos at CyberSEC Daily, a boutique cybersecurity publication run by a former NSA analyst who once reverse-engineered government malware using nothing but determination and spite. I sent them code samples, authentication proofs, unredacted Slack screenshots, and comprehensive system documentation. Then I called Emma Rodriguez. She answered immediately, breathless, probably hiding in a stairwell. "Maya? Jesus, I've been hoping you'd call. Did you see the video they're circulating?" "I saw their amateur editing job," I replied. "Tell me you have the real footage." "I have everything, Maya. Security logs, key card records, the actual server room footage, unedited." That was the moment I knew I had them completely. Because while Nexus Dynamics fabricated evidence showed me lurking around like some digital saboteur, Emma's authentic footage revealed the truth. Brandon Mitchell entering the server room at 1:43 a.m., connecting an unauthorized USB device, overriding security permissions with administrative credentials. Real-time footage synchronized with internal system logs, complete with his keystrokes, and, this was the perfect detail, he'd forgotten to disable the overhead audio recording. His voice, crystal clear. Once she's terminated, we'll reroute the authentication. Legal says she had a psychological breakdown. Verbatim. Emma encrypted the files, fragmented them across multiple secure locations. One vault in Norway, one in Singapore, one embedded in her cryptocurrency wallet, one disguised as fan fiction on a literature platform, and one uploaded to Alexandra Volkov's private blockchain network, tagged with my cryptographic signature. It was now both evidence and a nuclear weapon. Meanwhile, the cascading failure of Quantum Lock was becoming seismic. 3 Fortune 500 companies had suspended their contracts. A UN-backed digital trade initiative froze all integration projects. Nexus Dynamics stock plummeted 47% in a single trading session before the exchange halted transactions entirely. The board convened an emergency session. Brandon Mitchell disappeared from all public communications. And then, like poetic justice coded in Python, I received a text from an unlisted number. You win. Name your price to fix this. I stared at my phone for exactly 30 seconds, then replied with one word. No, because fixing it was never the objective. Watching them suffocate in a digital prison, they'd locked themselves inside. That was the symphony I composed. They attempted to circumvent me. Naturally. When cornered by a crisis of their own creation, corporate instinct isn't to apologize. It's to panic, outsource, and gaslight simultaneously. They assembled a crisis recovery task force and hired a third-party firm called Secure Logic Solutions to restore system integrity, like applying duct tape to a structural collapse. The Secure Logic team spent 48 hours attempting to crack Quantum Lock. They tried patching the smart contracts, resetting the core blockchain, recompiling the public-facing modules, as if that would somehow convince the private authentication engine to resume functioning. But Quantum Lock doesn't negotiate. It operates perfectly or it doesn't operate at all. Without the original biometric keys, it existed in a state of permanent digital coma, suspended between 2 logic gates, neither verified nor invalidated, just systematically deteriorating. Then came the media avalanche. The first headline whispered, Nexus Dynamics platform experiences technical irregularities. The second one screamed, $80 million authentication system collapses after architect departure. The third one delivered the killing blow. Former engineer accuses CTO of sabotage, releases audio evidence. That last one was my masterpiece. I released Brandon's server room confession with surgical timing, an anonymous upload watermarked with authentication metadata, and synchronized with security footage of his unauthorized access. The internet devoured it instantly. LinkedIn transformed into a corporate battlefield. Twitter generated conspiracy theories at the speed of light. Even TikTok joined the fray, with a 22-year-old content creator setting Brandon's confession to jazz music and titling it, How Not to Be a CTO, Episode 1. But the real crescendo came from Alexandra Volkov herself. She issued a public statement praising the architectural genius behind Quantum Lock, calling my original design the most sophisticated authentication protocol ever developed for enterprise blockchain applications. She concluded with a simple sentence that obliterated their entire defense. No organization should discard the foundation without the architect's explicit consent. In that single statement, she demolished their credibility completely. The board terminated Brandon Mitchell within 18 hours. Emergency vote ejected him like infected tissue. The following morning, CEO David Harrison called me personally. I didn't answer, so he left a voicemail. Polished, desperate, pathetic. Maya, I believe we've experienced some significant misunderstandings. We deeply value your contributions and expertise. Let's explore a collaborative path forward. He sounded like a man who just realized the loaded weapon he'd been waving around had accidentally discharged into his own chest. I responded, but not with a phone call. I scheduled a video conference and sent him a private Zoom link. One participant logged in exactly on time. Of course he did. I activated my camera first. So did he. I swear the man was perspiring through his pores. I didn't smile. I let the silence stretch between us like a tightening noose. Then I said, You called me redundant. He attempted to laugh it off. That was a miscommunication, Maya. Poor word choice on HR's part. I cut him off. You attempted to frame me for sabotage. That wasn't authorized by executive leadership. Brandon was acting independently, without board oversight. Save it. I leaned forward. You have 24 hours to transfer full intellectual property attribution rights, restore my equity vesting schedule, and issue a public correction acknowledging me as the sole architect of Quantum Lock. He blinked like a child seeing fire for the first time. And if we decline, then I'll release the other audio recording, I said calmly. What other recording? The board meeting where you joked about replacing me with fresh talent who won't demand so much credit. The one where you laughed about managing her out before she becomes too visible in the industry. The recording I hadn't yet published. His face drained of color, mouth opened slightly, eyes darting around his screen like he was searching for an escape route that didn't exist. I ended the call without pleasantries, without gratitude. Just one final whisper before the screen went dark. I was never locked out, David. I was just watching. They capitulated faster than I'd anticipated. 23 hours and 31 minutes later, I received the complete documentation package. PDFs stacked with trembling legal language and suddenly reverential clauses. Attribution restored. Equity retroactively recalculated. NDA voided. Public apology pre-drafted and submitted for my approval. I added one sentence. We regret undermining the visionary architect who built the foundation of our technological future. Then I clicked accept. But that wasn't the conclusion. That was merely the public funeral. Behind the corporate curtain, Nexus Dynamics was imploding like a star that had consumed too much of its own mass. 40% of their clients suspended payments. 3 major investors withdrew entirely, citing catastrophic loss of technical confidence. Internally, their development team devolved into a paranoid tribunal. Engineers pointing accusations at each other, everyone desperately trying to survive the radioactive fallout. Emma resigned and joined my new venture. Alexandra Volkov offered her triple her previous salary. I matched it. She declined both offers and said, let's just build something they can never touch. So we did. I took the architectural principles of ChronoSecure, eliminated the corporate contamination, and redesigned everything under a new identity, Obsidian Chain. We wrote the first 15,000 lines of code from a glass cabin in the Colorado Rockies, surrounded by snow-covered peaks and digital silence. Meanwhile, Nexus Dynamics attempted to rebrand themselves. They launched some pathetic initiative called Next Gen Ledger, like a disappointing sequel nobody had requested. It debuted with missing core features and a forced smile from their replacement CTO, a man who'd once asked me in Slack what an API endpoint was. Then came the industry conference, CryptoSecure Summit 2024. Every major player in cryptographic systems, blockchain governance, and distributed ledger architecture would be there. Alexandra Volkov had secured the opening keynote. And I had the closing presentation. By then, I'd become something between a cautionary tale and a minor legend. The woman who detonated her former employer and walked away holding the only copy of the instruction manual. My presentation was titled, The Myth of Replaceability. I opened with a slide displaying my old Nexus Dynamics employee badge, the word terminated stamped across it in red letters. I told the complete story, not the sanitized corporate version, not the headline summary, but my truth. How they'd attempted to erase me. How they built a digital kingdom on code they couldn't comprehend. How their obsession with control had cost them not just millions, but their industry reputation and corporate soul. Then I demonstrated Obsidian Chain. Live deployment, 10 seconds from initialization to full operation. Immutable, self-governing, trustless ledger architecture with distributed administrative authority. No single point of systemic failure. It even included humor. If you attempted to alter historical entries, the error message read, "Nice try, but you can't gaslight a blockchain." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was measured, heavy, intentional. Professional respect mixed with quiet awe. As I walked off that stage, I spotted David Harrison standing in the back corner, half concealed, eyes glazed, jaw clenched. He was clapping too, one beat behind everyone else, one corporate lifetime too late. He looked like a man watching the execution of a ghost he'd thought he'd successfully buried. I didn't look back. I thought that would be the end of our story, that the ashes would settle, the scavengers would disperse, and I'd return to being just a name whispered in glass-walled boardrooms, either as a cautionary tale or a legend, depending on who was telling it. But ghosts don't stay buried in the tech industry, not when there's still money to be extracted from their bones. 3 weeks after my crypto secure presentation, I received an anonymous tip via Proton Mail. Subject line: "You need to see this immediately." No greeting, no signature, just a link to a leaked proposal. What remained of Nexus Dynamics was attempting to license a white-labeled clone of ChronoSecure. New branding, fresh marketing materials, same fundamental architecture. Someone had taken my intellectual legacy and slapped their logo over it like a corporate sticker on a severed limb. Except their reverse-engineered code was catastrophically flawed. They tried to recreate quantum lock using decompiled fragments, clearly not understanding the recursive trust logic that made it secure. Worse, they'd fabricated entire sections, hard-coded authentication chains, simulated consensus protocols. Large portions of their blockchain were designed to appear immutable but contained silent override conditions. It wasn't just poor engineering. It was a trapdoor system disguised as enterprise security, and they were marketing it to sovereign governments, including a small but politically volatile nation that depended on data integrity to maintain literal peace between competing factions. If that system failed, and it would, people wouldn't just lose money. They'd lose lives. I didn't call it revenge this time. I called it responsibility. Working with Emma and our new team, I compiled a comprehensive forensic analysis, 127 slides of side-by-side code comparisons, metadata traces, architectural breakdowns, all cryptographically signed and time-stamped on Obsidian Chain itself. Then I wrote the exposé, The Myth of Innovation, how Nexus Dynamics forged a digital ghost system. It published on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday evening, they were international news, federal investigations, class action lawsuits, emergency audits across 3 continents. The prime minister of that vulnerable nation issued a public statement thanking the independent security expert who prevented a potential humanitarian crisis. They didn't name me. They didn't need to. The entire industry understood. Nexus Dynamics was finished, and I was finally completely free. Key lessons for your career. 1. Document everything always. Keep detailed records of your contributions. Save important communications and decisions. Create multiple backup systems for critical information. Never trust corporate memory. It's selectively edited. 2. Build your own infrastructure. Don't make yourself easily replaceable without consequences. Create systems that require your expertise to maintain. Develop relationships outside your current company. Always have an exit strategy prepared. 3. Know your true value. Understand exactly what you bring to the organization. Don't let others minimize your contributions. Be prepared to walk away if not properly valued. Your expertise is your power. Guard it carefully. 4. Play the long game. Strategic patience often beats emotional reactions. Build alliances before you need them. Plan for scenarios where corporate loyalty fails. Sometimes the best move is to let others make mistakes. 5. Control your narrative. Tell your own story before others tell it for you. Maintain evidence to support your version of events. Build a professional reputation independent of any single employer. Never underestimate the power of public perception. Freedom doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like silence, the kind you earn, the kind that wraps around your achievements like armor. After the exposé eliminated Nexus Dynamics permanently, the corporate vultures scattered for good. David Harrison attempted to pivot into some bootstrap consulting firm in Miami. Last I heard, he was pitching AI-powered project management tools to investors who wouldn't return his calls. Brandon Mitchell vanished entirely. Some say he moved to Portland. Others claim he's writing a memoir about corporate trauma. I hope he titles it, How to Get Outmaneuvered by the Woman You Called Redundant. Emma and I continued building. Obsidian Chain became more than technology. It became critical infrastructure. Nations adopted it for supply chain verification, digital governance, even a renewable energy consortium in Costa Rica using it to authenticate carbon credit transfers. All because one woman refused to surrender the keys to her own intellectual property. And I never sold those keys. I licensed the technology on my terms, with clear attribution. Every contract includes one line in bold. No derivative works shall be created without the original architect's explicit, verifiable consent. Sometimes I still receive messages from other engineers, usually women, usually exhausted. They say things like, I didn't realize I was allowed to walk away from the fire and still own the house I built. And I tell them, you don't walk away from the fire. You stay. You document. You watch them strike the match. And when they finally realize the blaze was their own creation, you build again, better, smarter, untouchable. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's architecture. It's standing on the 80th floor of a tower they tried to bury you beneath, holding the original blueprints and owning the whole damn building. Remember, your expertise is your power. Guard it wisely, document it thoroughly, and never let anyone convince you that you're replaceable when you're actually irreplaceable. Subscribe for more stories of corporate justice and career empowerment. Your former boss is probably watching too, and that's exactly the point.